All right, hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar on regulatory compliance in toys and how to prepare your supply chain. In light of recent developments in the global trade and economy, we realize how busy everyone is and truly appreciate you still taking the time to attend. My name is Todd Merton and I am the Head of Business Development for the Ethical Supply Chain Program, and I will be moderating today's webinar. With the instability businesses are suddenly facing today within their supply chains, it's more crucial now than ever to remain vigilant with compliance oversight. Instability can lead to greater pressure being placed on suppliers and an increased risk of corners being cut to save time and money. This can create more disruptions for your business in an already tense trading environment. As an organization, the Ethical Supply Chain Program looks to collaborate with other companies and organizations who can bring great value and expertise to our growing community of like-minded, responsible businesses, regardless of which industry you belong to. We are pleased today to be joined on this webinar by Fabacus, who are leaders in helping companies navigate through the ever-evolving global regulatory landscape and pioneers in the creation of digital product passport technology. Before we introduce today's presenters, just a quick overview of what we'll be covering during this webinar. A regulation rundown. We'll take a look at what regulations are relevant to businesses today and what you need to be aware of in the near future. What current products and services the Ethical Supply Chain Program has developed to support our community. A deep dive into the CSRDD, ESPR and its requirements, and a digital product passport roadmap. We will see a presentation of a mock digital product passport to see what you can do now to prepare ahead for implementation in 2028. And finally, a Q&A session. We would like this webinar to be as beneficial to everyone here as possible, so please do drop in the chat any questions you may have at any time during the presentations, and we will get to them during the Q&A session at the end. If we aren't able to address all questions here, we will make sure to reach out to you individually after the webinar. Without further delay, allow me to introduce today's presenters. From the Ethical Supply Chain Program, we have our President and CEO, Carmel Giblin, and joining us today from Fabacus are Jonathan Baker, Chief Commercial Officer, and Jamie Beck, Sustainability Lead. I'll now turn it over to Carmel to begin her presentation. Carmel? You're on mute.
Sorry. Hi, everyone. Sorry, the technology button just disappeared for me then. Apologies. Great to have so many of you join us today. We really appreciate it. And we know that today, as in lots of recent days, the world is just getting a little bit crazier. We know everyone will be completely focused right now on tariffs and the impact of those to their businesses. So we appreciate you taking time today to take a different or think about something different, which is regulation. Regulation is increasing. I think no matter where we are in the world, we're seeing regulation increase both today, but also the trajectory of regulation is that it will continue to increase. And that's really driven by a whole range of reasons, but ultimately by regulators, by governments responding to the interests and the areas that consumers are most concerned about. They want to ensure that they are buying products that they can trust from companies that they can trust, that are safe for them, and that don't abuse workers in the supply chain. And we all know that as busy people, it's very difficult for individual consumers to take time to understand what an individual company or brand is doing to ensure that their trust is well placed. So regulation, although it is often seen as a burden to companies, does help consumers, and I think helps create an even playing field. So regulation is something that I think we just have to embrace moving forward. And as we go through today's webinar, I think we'll also hear some interesting news about the opportunities that regulation may present, which is a little unusual sometimes, but I think through requirements such as the digital product passport, we see real opportunities for companies to engage with their consumers that they've never been able to do before. So I think there is some opportunity ahead, but it's no doubt consumers' expectation is increasing. And in order to meet regulation, we need to collect data. Data is absolutely critical. Sorry, Todd, just go back one. I'll let you, sorry. So yeah, so collecting data is really critical. Data is really powerful. It enables companies to tell their story transparently, robustly, to meet regulation. But I know sometimes in collecting data, it can seem like a huge, enormous burden. So what we're doing really at the Ethical Supply Chain is working with organizations that can help companies address that need. And I think one of the start points of today's webinar was the title, which is kind of, and a question we're often talked about within companies is, are you prepared for regulation? And we're hoping that this webinar today starts that conversation. So lots of regulation around, data required to meet that regulation. And I've just picked out two specific regulations that I think are most relevant to today's audience. The ESPR, which is Ecodesign for Sustainable Products Regulation, that's already entered into force. I know there are different timescales for that for different product categories. And for some of us in the toy industry, the requirement on toys may seem quite distant. But I think we'll learn today about the need to really be able to answer confidently that question, that we are prepared for the regulation when it comes. So ESPR has lots of requirements in it, but particularly around the requirement to have a digital product passport. We also have the current EU Toy Safety Directive, which is being revised. And that will become regulation. So it will move from a directive to regulation. We are expecting the clarity on that to come very soon on what the requirements of the regulation will be. And then also clarity on when the implementation date will be. We're expecting 30 months post the directive being confirmed. But again, that's all up for discussion. And again, within the EU toy safety regulation, as it will become, that really seeks to provide higher levels of child protection and covers everything from substance to product design, and will also have a requirement for the digital product passport. Things like digital product passport require data. And like I say, data is both powerful and critically important, but collecting it in a way that is useful for you as a business is also a great opportunity. So if we move on to the next slide, I was just going to talk about what we're doing specifically at ESCP to support our membership community. Today's a great example of that. We think it's really important. So the Ethical Supply Chain Program is a labour standards program. So we are experts in social compliance, in improving labour standards globally in all sorts of sectors. As many of you will know, we were created by the global toy industry, but we now work in many other sectors. So footwear, apparel, electronics, and regulation certainly doesn't generally have too many barriers. So a lot of what we're talking about when we think about regulation is relevant to every product category. But whilst we're experts in social compliance, we want to meet our membership community's needs by bringing together a suite of experts who can help our members really prepare for regulation and other opportunities and challenges that are coming our way. So if we think about regulation, we're really pleased at the Ethical Supply Chain Program to be partnering with Fabacus, who will talk a lot more once I finish about the details of regulation and how they're helping companies prepare and be prepared for meeting that regulatory requirement. One area that I want to, or two areas just to highlight, we are a membership community, and that means that all companies that work with us and engage with us have the same opportunities, no matter your size. And although some of us may think the regulation only applies to the very largest companies, inevitably regulation impacts everyone in the supply chain, because the largest companies who may be directly required to comply will no doubt need their suppliers in the supply chain to share information with them. So one of the things that we do at the Ethical Supply Chain Program is facilitate working groups to make sure that we're all clear about the different roles and the opportunities that we have to play. And also by coming together to share learnings and best practice, it helps build everyone's capability. One of the working groups that we have in place at the moment was created to develop a new assessment program. And really that is in support of what's expected around the new EU Toy Safety Regulation when it is confirmed. But also, I think just meeting the increasing demand from consumers for more recycled products to be available. So more recycled content in toys. So we came together and have created a new program called the Recycled Chemical Safety Assessment Program. And if we move to the next slide, I'll just share a little bit about that program. So Recycled Chemical Safety Program, we have developed in direct response to requests from some of our membership community, specifically the Lego Group, Crayola, Target, and Mattel, who all are committed to doing more around and creating more content that is recycled in their products, in their end products. But had identified that the use of recycled chemical materials was presenting a greater challenge in managing that effectively. So we created a working group. We are the experts in data collection, but the members of the working group are actually the experts in what data needs to be collected. And already this working group have identified more than 400 substances and their associated testing requirements. So there's a lot of detail around the Recycled Chemical Safety Assessment Program. The first user interface will be available to companies to view and to provide feedback on later this month. And the whole program is expected to go live by the end of this year. So as an aside, we'd encourage anyone who is interested to learn more about this new chemical safety assessment to get in touch, to join the working group and help deliver a program that really looks to reduce duplication, improve efficiencies, and ultimately increase the availability of recycled products on the marketplace for consumers. And data that's obviously held within this part of our program, as well as all the data that's held in our social compliance and labour standards assessments and audit programs, all will be helpful data to meet regulation as we go forward, and also populate products such as the digital product passport. So that's a quick snapshot. I don't want to take too much time today because we have the real experts on this webinar today from Fabacus. So I will pass over to them. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carmel. Next up, we'll hear from Jamie Beck, Sustainability Lead at Fabacus, and I will turn the presentation over to you, Jamie.
Thanks, Todd. Thanks, Carmel. Let me just share my screen. Lovely. Thanks for that. We're just give us 2 seconds.
Jamie, sorry, there's a bit of an echo.
Yeah. Is that better? That's better. Excellent. Thanks for that. So firstly, I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on Fabacus. Really, today we want to, as Carmel said, to help inform you around ESPR. And actually, rather than going through too many slides, I want to pass over to my colleague, Jonathan, shortly to actually show you what a DPP would look like. And we've created a toy one. So without that, I'll just give you a very brief intro into Fabacus about what we do. Fabacus originated from the licensing industry, where we sort of branch licensing industry and the retail sector. So we're a data as a service company, and we partner with some of the biggest global licensors in the world, including NBC, Universal, Paramount, Hasbro, and Warner Brothers. So whilst we work with authenticated catalogs, where we take data from licensors and combine them with all the data from licensees to make one authenticated catalog, we very much, by chance, have developed a piece of software and a platform that lends itself perfectly well for digital product passports and to bring that data together. So what I'm going to do is just give you a very quick update on CSDDD and CSRD, and then we'll get into ESPR and passports. So I'm sure a lot of you will be aware and have been following and would have seen news recently. So I'm sure a lot of you will be aware of what these two regulations are. But if we take CSDDD, where it requires companies to address both the human rights and the environmental risks, and not just within their own operations, but across all of their values chains. It's important to note it applies to large companies that are actually based in the EU and also those outside the EU who are active all within the EU market. There are real penalties and consequences for any sort of non-compliances. So companies can face civil liabilities. And ultimately, the goal there is to promote responsible business practices on a global scale. So that's CSDD in summary. Shifting into CSRD. So this focuses a lot more on transparency and reporting around the impacts, the sustainability impacts. So it requires companies to disclose ESG related impacts for environmental, social, and governance. So this replaces the older NFRD, but with a much broader scope and more stringent requirements. I'm going to skip over who it applies to because the next slide has the update from this month. But it's worth saying that for CSRD also mandates the third-party data assurance, and it's standardized reporting through yet another European standard, the ESRS. So this is the update that came out literally last week. So for CSDD, it's really for both of these, they've pushed them back and changed the requirements of how the percentage of companies it's going to affect. So with CSDD, as of April 2025, member states will have until July 27 to transpose the directive into national law. The largest firms for compliance will require starting from the 26th of July 28. So that's been pushed back a year. A significant addition is that, or amendment, is that the supply chain assessments must be conducted every 5 years. So this was going to be every year. So there's quite a shift there and change. Just to reiterate, the directive remains consistent in it wants to address the human rights and the environmental risks across the global value chains. So that's for CSDD. For CSRD, there's been some real key changes. So some of the firms will see their reporting obligations delayed until 2027. So again, that's shifted on a year. And importantly, one of the biggest changes is that the European Commission has proposed narrowing the scope so that CSRD would only apply to companies with more than 1,000 employees. So in real term, that could exempt around 80% of the companies that were previously expected to report under CSRD. So as a result, smaller firms, so those with fewer than 500 employees and non-public interest entities are now likely to be excluded from mandatory CSRD reporting. It's worth saying as a caveat that none of this has been approved yet. It has been pushed through, but it's likely it looks like there's no real objection from anyone. So one more thing I just wanted to, again, it's quite topical, there's quite a lot of talk about it, is the extended producer responsibility. So whilst I'll touch on that, Fabacus, we're a data company and we're starting now to work with companies and partners like Valpak and Economy to enable us to ingest some packaging and product data as we do for the digital product passport into our compliant catalogue. And what that will allow us to do is work with companies like Valpak to be able to negate that reporting element and that submission element that brands, retailers would have to do. So it's really a value-added service that that we would use. So extended producer responsibility, it basically shifts the responsibility onto the producers and the brand owners. In the UK in particular, it applies to large and small producers based on the turnover and volume of packaging they supply. France, just as a note, has already rolled out EPR for textiles. In the UK, we're moving from data collection with the first reporting deadline of the 1st of April 2024. The actual fees kick in by October this year. And by 2026, we're seeing modulated fees, meaning that the cost will vary based on how recyclable your packaging is. And it's very much starting with packaging, and then that will move on to product and its materials. So the costs around the UK, and if you compare them with Europe, range widely. So at the moment, for about £215 per tonne for paper in the UK, up to €790 per tonne in Italy for some really less recyclable packaging. It's just a note to say that in the UK, the 2024 regulations officially replaced the older 2007 framework around the Packaging Waste Directive. So on to ESPR. So this is the core element that we focus on at Fabacus, about how we can work with businesses and partners to get brands and retailers ready for ESPR. And in particular, we're talking about the digital product passport. But rather than go straight into the passport, I just wanted to mention that this is quite a hero moment for the EU in asking for some of the requirements, both on the product and the passport. So it's going to be the first regulation that applies to any physical good placed on the EU market. So it's only food, feed, and medicine that's exempt at the moment. It will give very strict requirements on the minimum sustainable performance. And that could be everything from the product's material to how it can be recycled. It will give the EU power to ban products that fail to meet those standards, so to stop them being placed on the market. It will cover greenwashing, which again is another focus of the EU. So it will introduce rules around claims and labelling. It will work very closely with customs to stop those products that either haven't got a digital product passport or don't meet the requirements of ESPR. And as I said, it will include the requirement of digital product passports, which we'll come on to. Just as a view of the type of information that we include in the passports is you'll have things like standard product data. So that could be the composition of the material, the origin of the fibers. You'll have requirements on supply chain data, which will definitely probably be, you would be transparent to show your first tier, your manufacturing tier 1 factory, but it may require others. It will definitely require a product environmental impact data. So that could be carbon, water, for example. It would include the data displayed to be verified and have certification. And then there'll be a lot of things around end of life instructions and about what we call the circular services. So that could be repair or recycling. In terms of timelines, so as it was mentioned earlier, it's already in EU law as of last year. We're now looking for probably the end of the year when there will be details on specific product requirements, and that will include the DPP data. And then in 2026-27 is when the EU expect to see bodies, companies, brands, anyone importing goods to the EU to comply. And then they will look to enforce it mid to end of 2027. So it's a relatively short time period from where we are here today. To put that in a bit of a context to toys, this gives us a little bit of a view about, again, based on my limited knowledge of product development. And if you were developing a toy and you look to start that sort of next year, you can see where that would sit in the middle of it in terms of compliant enforcement. So for toys, the latest, and it is very much the latest, looks like it would be enforced in 2029. And just in case we've got people from the licensing industry, I just thought it would be worth touching on where does the responsibility sit with ESPR. So really, the responsibility lies with whoever is placing the product on the EU market. So if that's a licensee and it's the manufacturer or the importer, they would be the economic operator. If it's a licensor, as a pure play licensor, they would not be, as they wouldn't be placing it on the market. However, because the licensor is the one importing into the EU, the license is still responsible that they might be able to provide data to the licensee, if that's within the role. And if it is, if you're a licensor and a licensee, it would just be a case you'd need to be very clearly and to identify it, who is placing that product on the market, which entity. Next, just to briefly talk our compliant catalogue. So this is really what we refer to the house as an analogy. So the roof being the digital product passport, which is essentially a microsite, which looks great, but actually the important part of it is what we call the house. And this is what we refer to as the compliant catalogue. So it enables businesses to create fully compliant, structured data that's validated and centrally managed. So it meticulously organizes and structures product information, ensure it aligns with the regulatory and brand specific requirements. It's delivered built-in validation mechanisms that catch errors, omissions, or inconsistencies before the products go to market. And it empowers businesses to operate confidently and transparency. And really, the key point of it, it enables businesses to scale without having to make amendments each time or carry out certain tasks. So it enhances trust between brands, licenses, and retailers by maintaining accuracy and traceability throughout the product lifecycle. So I'm just going to hand over to Jonathan now, who will talk to you about and show you a digital product passport for toys.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. I hope everyone can hear me. So interesting around the regulation. I guess it's my job now to show you the roof versus the house to complete the analogy on that side. But it is nevertheless the more visual element of what is likely to be digital product passports that are taking place across certainly the whole of Europe over the next 3 to 4 years on that side. So what we've done is we have mocked up a DPP to be able to demonstrate exactly what a DPP can look and feel like. I say can look and feel like versus will look and feel like, for the main reason being that certainly this mocked up one that I'm going to demonstrate in a moment is related to a toy. And as Jamie's just explained with regards to the regulations, the exact details of exactly what will be captured in a toy DPP are yet to be published by the EU. However, because ESPR is a framework regulation, we know the components that will go in there for sure. So we've mocked something up to be able to demonstrate a couple of things for you. Number one is how some of these data points can actually present themselves to the shopper or the consumer. And number two, to be able to demonstrate to you the art of the possible. There is no doubt within this mocked up DPP that there are additional data points in there that may not be required for the first iteration of a toy DPP. But there most certainly are components, particularly around the safety regulations, that have already been demonstrated to be part of the toy DPP for obvious reasons on that side. The other thing I'll mention quickly before I jump into it is, number one, we have deliberately chosen a licensed toy as the illustrative example. The licensee, in this case, is of course entirely fictional on that side, called Happy Factory. And the licensor, who is known in this case as Racer Studios, is also entirely fictional. I appreciate there are lots of different people on the call today, and so we didn't want to actually use anything that was active and live in the marketplace. The other thing I should mention is that all the data that I'm demonstrating on this mock-up is actually made up. So when it comes to things like water usage, carbon footprint, please don't judge us in terms of what we pull together. Remember that we are a platform publishing DPPs on that side end to end. And whilst we do actually have active DPPs in the marketplace in the UK, across a fashion brand partner of ours. The toy one is 100% a mock-up on that side. So I'm just going to ask Jamie to share the DPP so that I can talk you all through what we put together for you. Great. Hopefully everyone can see the red truck, or I should say rapid all-terrain racer in front of you right now. So this is, remember, consumer facing, so therefore has got to some extent be consumer friendly on that side. That's very different from the information and the data points that you may all hold inside your own businesses. B2B information, of course, is one thing, but then making it digestible and legible and understandable for the consumer or the shopper is quite another thing. So that is the translation that needs to take place between the house or the platform, if you like, in terms of all the data that's housed in there versus the data that will be used to publish a DPP on that side. So imagine now that you're a shopper, you have bought this rapid all-terrain racer, you see a QR code probably on the side of the packaging versus the product itself. On this particular example, you have scanned it, and essentially this is what it will take you to, which is a microsite with the product data in it. The first element, you'll see an image. We can put videos in there. We have done in the past for real live executions. And of course, that can be a carousel image as well, typically in terms of the kind of images you might find on a good e-commerce listing. You'll also see some of the product description and then also an explanation around the product. And in this particular case, up front is around some of the material composition and also the country of origin of this particular product. To pick up on Carmel's point earlier around this is just more than regulation. On this particular DPP mock-up, you'll see immediately a component which has been added in, which invites the shopper in this case to potentially explore the other options of shopping the trucks or the other cars in the range, or indeed the accessories for this all-terrain racer. So in itself, you already start to see some business application start to come through on this particular example DPP. Coming further down though, more into the regulatory areas, you'll see the different collapsible sections that we have here. And the first section that I'd like to take you through is Trace My Steps, which essentially demonstrates exactly where the product has actually come from in terms of the factory of origin and how it actually got to the location in which you are in on that side, otherwise known as the product journey. But of course, the product journey is more complicated than just adding together two locations. And so here is where we start to explore a little bit more in terms of the importer's details on this side. And then when it comes to the actual factory, you can see here that it goes in terms of the molding. So we've assumed here that that is one tier in terms of the actual product. And then number two, that it would actually be assembled into a different factory as well. Current regulations will probably point to, as Jamie has mentioned, probably the factory of assembly, but we did want to put a tier one example in there of the molding factory as well. Similarly, you know, our partnership with the Ethical Supply Chain Program as well, we have declared here a certification on this made-up factory in terms of being certified by the Ethical Supply Chain, and of course, they're incredibly high audit standards on that side. So I won't ask Jamie to demo this, but in an example, we have worked on the fact that if you click that logo, then it would take you through to the Ethical Supply Chain's website or microsite to be able to explain more to the shopper or the consumer around the program itself. When we come further down, we start to look at the components in terms of what makes up this particular illustrative example. And you'll see here that there are different elements around the chassis and the wheels in terms of where they have come from and the method of transport by which to get to the factory for final assembly. And that's very much the product journey in terms of those specific components. Clearly, depending on the supply chain and also the regulatory details that will emerge, you can either extend that or shorten it, depending on the requirement that will materialize. One thing we do know for sure is that the environmental impact will most definitely be incorporated within a digital product passport, regardless of the product category. It's something we already do on textiles, and we would expect this to come through again in other categories, such as this example in toys. At the top, you'll see here that we have carbon on one tab and then water on the other on that side. And if I flick back into the carbon one for a moment, you'll be able to see particularly all the different areas around what has made up the carbon footprint of this particular product on that side. So this is very much using further down the Higg index from Worldly, of course, in terms of their package to be able to calculate these particular environmental impact scores on that side. So you will notice, therefore, that this is not necessarily a self-declared thing by the Happy Factory. This is something which has been calculated independently by a body that is usually used for these different areas on that side. Drawing upon what Jamie had mentioned earlier around EPR, the extended producer responsibility, particularly in packaging, this becomes an important area in terms of two particular areas. Number one is the product packaging itself, and then further down as we move to the right, you'll be able to see the fact that there is also the transit carton as well. Knowing, of course, that packaging takes many different forms, both in terms of inner and outer, in terms of unit, consumer unit, and also trade pack. So this, once again, is declared on the digital product passport. Particularly in relating to toys, of course, safety being a massive consideration for obvious reasons, something which I have no doubt the people on this call who are representatives of the toy sector live and breathe each day. So this is where really we're working through the individual areas around the safety testing on that side. Of course, the EN71 and its associated subcomponents, depending on how the product is assembled, are all listed here in terms of examples on that side, including the actual lab in which that was tested. I appreciate there are many different testing and certification companies that are used for individual products and also for testing components. And this is where this information is likely to come from in terms of needing to be independently verified. And talking about that verification here, we have some certifications in terms of, on this particular example, of course, Ethical Supply Chain Program certified, as you saw earlier, in relation to the factories, and also the CE marking in terms of the regulation already required within the European Union on that side. Chemical compliance is another, of course, big area, permanently evolving, and once again, whether this actually involves using independent labs for testing and certification, then of course this is where that level will actually be declared on that side. And those are some of the regulatory environments, but let's not forget that the backbone of a lot of the EU intent is actually around circularity. That's either making products last longer or being able to dispose of them in a better way. And of course, one of the ways for making products last longer and to make them more durable is how to look after them. And so what we've detailed here is some of the care instructions in terms of how to look after this product in the attempt that it can last longer and therefore be more durable on that side. Equally, there is an element here around my finer details. Now, this is an element where actually it brings in a lot of the data components. So you will see here, and this is important in terms of licensing. This is around now authenticating that this particular product is in fact under license from our very good licensor, Racer Studios on that side. And we are able to do this from a data perspective, back to Jamie's earlier points around an authenticated catalogue, because we are, in short, able to marry together licensor data with this particular licensee, Happy Factory, join them together and authenticate that this is an officially licensed product. So once again, the DPP performs an additional role here, which is also around brand authentication. Coming down to some other areas, we have the Zeller key, which is our own proprietary individual key. Each one of those is different, of course, by every individual item. And I do mean item rather than batch on that side. And also the GS1 digital link, for you to know that we are certified partners of GS1 across 4 different areas, of which one involves the digital link on that side. You can also see some of those areas of composition, batch numbers, the live date in terms of when the product was due to go live, some of its dimensions, and then importantly here, two areas at the bottom. One, of course, is the GTIN, otherwise known as the UPC or EAN to many, on that side, so that can be verified, and perhaps of topical reference more and more at this precise moment in time, the tariff code. Coming further down, once again, a nod to the circularity, which is a main driver here. So this is all about repair and reuse. I know that many different companies have their own partners, particularly in terms of recycling, and also in terms of repairing or reusing, or indeed actually reselling. Some partners also have preferred resellers. This, once again, is an open space in terms of where you may want to, as a company, place your own partnerships or indeed recommendations in terms of how to repair and reuse this product. But of course, one final thing I'm going to look at, and Carmel mentioned it earlier, was around, this is all regulatory heavy, of course. However, our interpretation as well, and this once again is live in the UK marketplace, our interpretation is that actually this can be used not only as a regulatory fulfiller, but also at the same time, a DPP is a great opportunity to connect directly with that shopper. So what we have is we have an extended DPP here where the gifting element is around actually rewarding the shopper for their purchase and to encourage further purchases. So what you'll see here is some made up examples of what the shopper or the consumer can actually be offered for having purchased this product. These components and offers can be changed at any moment in time, by the way, hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, yearly, whatever that might be, because I appreciate that lots of partnerships change, as might offers on that side. And then simply to claim the gift, the shopper would register to basically unlock their gift. And so they register here, and then once registered, they will be sent an email for them to be able to redeem their gift. Okay, that's all, of course, as you might expect, GDPR compliant, because you have to opt in to be able to register on that side. Okay, so that's a quick run through of the DPP before I eat any more time into anyone else's part of today.
Excellent. Thanks, Jonathan. I'm just conscious of time, Todd, and to allow we've got a couple of slides really just to demonstrate the gifting element and the commercial aspect and some figures. But actually, if I think I should hand back to yourself and leave a bit of time for Q&A. And if we've got time, then we can obviously show a couple more slides later on.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. All right. So I know got a few questions here. Let me get to the first. Okay. All right. So the first question we received is, what should I start doing now to prepare for ESPR and the digital product passport regulations?
Yeah, I would say initially start to become aware of the subheadings of ESPR in terms of if you look at the subheadings, the overall goal of the regulation, you can denote through any product type what the likely requirements are going to be. So whether the product, which is not product specific, would need to be of recycled content, for example, the supply chain. And what I would start doing is going through and start to map your data points that you believe will be required. So Fabacus is part of Surpass, also in the stakeholder group, and Surpass, just to explain to people that don't know, are helping to shape and to demo what it looks like and what a digital passport requirements will be. Then we're also members of the Joint Research Committee, which helps prioritize and look at specific product categories. So again, our contact details will be available. We're more than happy to show you and demonstrate where we've got experience and knowledge in different product sectors like apparel and clothing. And we're quite happily send you a spreadsheet with the data points that we believe will be required. And then you could literally just apply that to whichever product category you'll need. So in essence, it would be to prepare, get to know the regulation. There's a lot of information out there. B, have a look at what the data points we've gone through today, just to give that example that Jonathan has showed, but in the elements of supply chain and your product, on all the way through it. And yeah, know where your data is if you've got it. And yeah, speak to, if it's not Fabacus, other DP providers to get some advice.
Great. Thank you.
Sorry, Todd, I'd just add to that as well. I think it's always a bit of a challenge when we're talking to companies when they first start to get their supplier data together. I don't think any company has got really good, clean data when you're starting off looking at mapping your supply chain. So I'd really also encourage people to start to work with their colleagues in procurement or other departments to get a list of actually, or a clean list of your suppliers, your supply chain.
Another question here, is the digital product passport regulation, is it a requirement for the EU only, and when is it taking effect?
Yeah, so the specific dates for each product type will be set. I think the first EU announcement will be within the next couple of weeks, where they're set out the initial product types, which we believe are going to be apparel, furniture, and tires. And then probably later on in the year or early next year, they'll actually start to give specific dates for different product types. And definitely toys will be up there. They're set a date where they're ready to lay out when toy specific criteria will be developed, and then they will give a compliance date to when it will be enforceable.
Right. Here, can I make a DPP now for tariffs and EPR before clarity is given on the ESPR requirements?
Yes, very much so. And we'd advise that. We know of some major large global brands that do have QR codes, unique QR codes on products, purely for the commercial benefit of customer acquisition data, because it's a way to engage with their consumers. But we've already shown that where we work with brands like Nobody's Child and Chinty and Parker, that they're already doing it. So there's nothing to stop businesses and brands creating a digital product passport now, collating that data, and working with providers to get it out there way before the regulations. So, we're working with brands such as Tesco, for example, to start piloting what that looks like for them. So they understand where their data is and can actually produce for Tesco, it's non-consumer facing, but actually go through the entire process of mapping the data, designing the digital product passport, and then actually, creating a QR code that will eventually go on their product. But yes, there's no reason why you couldn't do that now already.
Great. And I had another question here.
Just while you're looking at another question, just I think to build on Jamie's answer earlier, the DPP I think is only relevant for products in the EU, but is that correct, Jamie? Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, Carmel. Yes, I totally missed that element of the answer. It is at the moment. It's worth pointing out that United Nations are also developing a digital product passport, and we've been involved in the first two meetings. So whilst it's very early stages, they're very much looking at what the EU's doing at the moment, and I would say it would be extremely likely that they would take a lot of the requirements if they've already got something tried and tested for the EU, which then they could then roll out globally. So I think it's very much started with the EU. I think it's one of the only regulations I've been told that the UK is looking to potentially adopt because of how close we are in terms of businesses, that people who trade in the UK and in Europe. So yes, it's starting with the EU, but I can see it coming on board with the UK and wider, within the next sort of 4 to 5 years.
Great. Next question here. Can the presented DPP example address the need for multilingual information?
Yes, very much so. So when you scan the QR code or you touch an NFC tag, immediately we'll be able to tell the geolocation of that product or where that product's being scanned. So we would immediately translate it into the correct language.
Got it. Great. Here's another question here. What if my product is a toy, but its component parts require a DPP sooner than the toy category? What has priority? Is it the final product or is it the component parts?
It would be whichever one is regulated first with the date. So I assume that question is referring to batteries, I expect. So if there's a battery passport required on that individual component, they would have to abide by that first, and then latterly it would be the product.
Great. Another question here. Can we have a unique QR code linked to a different product, or each product, toy in our case, has to have its specific QR code?
It will be unique. So very much the requirement is looking at the product being a digital twin. So the EU will be able to track and trace what happens to that product, whether it's repaired, how it's recycled. So based on the lovely truck that you saw, if a brand or retailer was buying 10,000 units, then each of those 10,000 units would have to have a different unique code.
Okay. Let me just see here, ones that haven't been answered. Any estimate on timescales to create such a catalog and the resources required?
Only really what we've given. So it's a little bit of watch this space for product specific dates and requirements. I would say by the latest, probably by February or March next year, there will be clear guidance on the different product categories that the EU has prioritized. But very much toys are in the top segment of that, along with furniture, some random products like fishing nets and other things, where they look at the most impact that it has on the environment. They've also considered how much of that product is being recycled at the moment. So they've done a lot of research into the criteria of what comes first, really, based on products.
Just gonna add in a little bit on that side. So with regards to the resource required and how long it might take, that rather also depends a little bit on your starting point. So if your starting point is, I don't have much information at all, then this is going to probably be quite a journey in terms of, number one, getting hold of the information, much of which you may not own as an organization. It may be third-party data, for example, if you are using factories that you do not own on that side. So I'd say, number one, it rather depends on where you are. In terms of benchmarking where you are, then, there are organizations out there. I'm sure there are sort of many consultants, some of which might be on this call. If you're in the licensing sector, there's products of change who can help you in terms of roadmaps. But I do think that being able to figure out where you are right now and also where you need to get to, which might be a much more paled down version of the DPP we showed you for illustrative purposes, but nevertheless will involve a lot of the data we did show. then I think that's the first exercise in terms of mapping. Number two is kind of how you actually get there in terms of getting hold of that information. Number three is really where you're going to store it and put it all together, which is quite a lot of the platform that we spoke about in terms of compliant catalog. Now, in terms of how many people are involved, once again, that rather depends on the nature of your supply chain and also your own employees dedicated to this. For example, though, for some of the DPPs that we work with, typically that involves supply chain and sourcing personnel inside an organization, as well as some of the digital marketeers, as well as any sustainability people on that side. So it rather depends on your start point, which is why I think we're all saying that even though it seems like quite a long way away now, if you look at potentially your start point, the data requirements and building that data over time, and then also being able to execute against digital product passports, I think that's probably going to take 2.5 years anyway, depending on the complexity of your supply chains.
Great, thank you. Looks like a couple more questions here. Does the unique product code you just mentioned need to be on the product itself, or on the, for an example, on the physical plastic toy?
It would need to be physically on the toy or product wherever possible. You are going to get different scenarios where that's not possible. For example, the pen I'm holding in my hand will be difficult to get, as you can just about see, it will be difficult to get a QR code on there. So it's very likely that where it's not possible to place a digital carrier onto the product, it would very much be aligned to the packaging. And the way that we believe that will work is that it will be a unique code or QR code on the packaging. The consumer would scan it and they would be able to register that product in their digital wallet. So very similar to your Apple and Android wallets that people use today. If people buy with Apple Pay now, there's already a product section in there. So it's likely you would be able to register and claim that unique code as yourself, and therefore you'd be able to access the digital product passport through that.
Okay. Just conscious of time here. It looks like we've got one last question. Are distance sales considered in scope?
It's any product that's placed on the EU market. So if you're a UK business selling to a customer in Paris or Germany, it would have to comply in the same way as a B2B sale to a wholesaler in a European country.
Great. And it looks like that is all of the questions we have now. So yes, if anybody has any closing remarks, just want to say again, thank you for everybody taking the time out in such a busy time to go through the webinar here. And you can see the contact information on the screen. So please do not hesitate to reach out to any of us if you have any questions or anything specific that you'd like to discuss. We'll be more than happy to discuss that with you or get you to the right person. So again, thank you again, everybody, for your time, and I'll leave it for anybody else with anything to close with.
No, just to add my thanks to everyone. I hope you found the webinar useful. Big thanks to Jamie and Jonathan at Fabacus. There's a huge amount of knowledge and expertise within their organization and their minds. So we're really appreciating them supporting the community of members at the Ethical Supply Chain Programme. And as Todd said, we're here to help you move forward through the regulatory requirements. So please do reach out if we can be of any further assistance.
Great. All right. Well, appreciate it. And everybody enjoy the rest of your day. And we look forward to hopefully hearing from you. And that'll conclude today's webinar. Thank you.